Well, we have Suave Ballin. This is the cursed Ballin video. He's got no hat, chat. And honestly, let's compare. Right now, let's compare. All right? Who's got the better hairline? Come on! Who's got the better hairline? Huh? Come on. Guys, you're supposed to say me. Thank you, Little Miss Ball. Guys, you're supposed to say me. My big toe has a better hairline, to be honest. Well, you got more forehead, Smile. I regret asking anything.
What's going on? What are we doing today? We're doing, hold on a minute. Hold on. Feel the power building. Today, we're going to cover two stories that are of these strange...
Good bit. I'll give him that. I'll give him that solid bit.
On the morning of June 20th, 2005, a 40-year-old man named Wang Diang stood just inside the doorway
Wang Dang! Wang Dang!
of a little home in rural northeastern China. Outside, it was pouring rain with all this crazy thunder and lightning, and also there were these hailstones coming down the size of golf balls, smashing into everything. I mean, just the impact on the roof must have been so loud. And so as Wang was standing in the doorway, he was actually looking out in the direction of the storm because all these people were running towards him to come in the house.
Get you a ball
Wang
and
was
hat,
actually
too.
hosting a wake for a friend, and he was hosting this wake at this man's home. And all the people running up to him were all the
What is a wake? Chinese wake. Hosting a wake. Do they just eat cantaloupe, melon, apples, and oranges?
mourners coming to pay their respects. Now, by this point, most of the
Alan
mourners
Wake?
had already made it inside the house, and so Wang was basically just waiting for the last few stragglers to make their way inside.
Post-funeral.
And so from his post at
okay.
the door, Wang is watching the storm and all these people, and he also took stock of the fact that as he looked out to the big tobacco fields that kind of were all over the place in this town, that was the primary way people made money in this town, he noticed that, there was nobody out there tending the crops. And even in rainstorms, people would tend these crops because this was their livelihood, but Wang understood why nobody was out there. Yes, it was the storm, but specifically, lately there had been these crazy lightning strikes in storms.
I'm convinced Pig isn't real. He doesn't know what helicopter parent, contraceptive, or what a wake is. Honestly, you guys aren't real either. You're all just made up in my mind. I'm talking to myself. You're not even real.
Like this that struck the field. And so these workers that were normally out in the fields every single day, they weren't doing that anymore. Finally, the last couple arrived and Wang greeted them and brought them inside. And then he shut the door and then began making his rounds inside the home, making sure all the guests had what they needed. And also just kind of making sure the wake was, overall a positive experience, all things.
Can't say Amethyst. I'm used to saying it like that. Amethyst. Fuck you guys.
Considered. Now,
Y'all
to
are
be
the worst.
clear, Wang
Focus
was
on
not
the
a
video.
monk or a priest
God.
or even a relative of the person who was deceased. Instead, he was just kind of like the guy that emceed virtually all events in this town. So if there was weddings, he was the guy who officiated the wedding.
So, bro was like, "Hey, yo, let's get this wake started," and then starts fucking like playing turn down for whip, and people are just like, is that what he does? It's like a DJ for funerals. That'd be sick, dude. I want that at my funeral. I want like an old MC just doing that shit. Y'all ready to respect the dead? All right.
And if there were funerals or wakes or things of that nature, also Wang was often tapped to MC that as well. He was kind of like the village elder, if you will,
Air
even
horn.
though he was only 40 years old. And Wang, he really treasured the fact that he was the guy that got to do these things, and so he put a lot of time and energy into making sure they went extremely well. So, on this day, as he was making his rounds, checking in with all the mourners, nobody really needed anything, and so Wang sort of felt like he didn't have a role, and he scanned around the room looking for something else he could do that would be productive, and he noticed the incense near the casket was going out. And so Wang walked over, he pulled out the extinguished incense, he got a new stick of incense, put it in, and he lit it, and then he just kind of stood over the casket and closed his eyes and began saying a silent prayer for the dead. And as Wang did this, suddenly there was
person
this
wakes up?
deafening roar, and then
Oh.
everything went black. A few seconds later, that deafening roar faded, and it was replaced by the sound of all the mourners in the house basically screaming and trying to figure out what just happened. And so as people began kind of trying to size up the situation, they saw there was all this smoke near the casket, and
Wait, is this the one where like the building collapsed? Or maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking something
there was all these wooden debris everywhere. And then people looked up at the ceiling and they saw there was now a pretty good sized hole that had
do not want
blackened
this
char
funeral? Why
around
not?
the edges of the hole that was kind of smoldering. And then unfortunately, once the smoke really had
Is
kind
this the
of
part where we start
dissipated,
kicking?
Wong was laying right underneath this
Possibly.
hole in the roof, and half of his head was gone. It was very clear he was deceased. And it didn't take long
Huh?
for mourners to figure out what had happened. Wong had unfortunately been struck by lightning.
Yo!
2 days later, Wong's family helped.
Building collapsing was a wedding, I'm fairly sure.
A wedding? Yeah, I think it was too. But yo, bro got a fucking lightning struck. Wait, how did he lose his entire head though? That's my confusion here. Like if you're struck by lightning, it would just go through your body and then you just die. Like how did like half of his head just explode? Don't question, Pig. Keep watching. Don't you dare question the professional yapper.
Held a funeral for Wong, and basically the entire village showed up for this funeral because remember, Wong was really a central member of this community, and so it was a really big loss.
Did someone
that
else
he was
get
now
struck?
dead. And candidly, this only stoked the fears that everybody had about lightning strikes.
It's lightning, man. You never know. All right. Can you explode from getting struck by lightning? The person is part of a flash channel. Enormous quantities of energy pass through the body very quickly, resulting in internal burns, organ damage, explosions of flesh and bone, and nervous system damage. Oh, this one says no. If you get struck by it directly by a lightning bolt, will you explode? No, it depends on the path of the current. Death would be very likely, but if the majority of the current flows across the outside of your head, so I don't know. I'm just too focused on heads exploding.
I mean, this was really becoming a huge issue. But after the funeral ended and Wong had been placed
When Pig looks something up and proves himself wrong, I didn't prove myself wrong. It literally said no.
into a hearse and driven off to the crematorium to be cremated, the people at this funeral who were kind of making their way out began kind of talking a little bit more candidly about what had happened to Wong. I mean, it was obvious he was struck by lightning, but in this town, there was a lot of superstition around deaths like this, when it seems like how he died is almost like an act of God. I mean, how many people get struck by lightning? Even if you're scared of being struck by lightning, that is...
You know what makes me mad, dude? Okay. You guys see the video of the lady who like got her truck slammed and then she was like dangling off the cliff or whatever, hanging off the bridge? She was dangling off the bridge for like an hour and she got saved. You know what pissed me off, dude? You want to know who she thanked? Because she got saved, right? She thanked God. It's like, you know, sometimes I don't think God's there, but he was there this time. Thank you, God. What about the people who saved you? What about the loads of firemen and people doing shit, like working their ass off to save your life? If they were a few minutes late, you could have died. But no. Thank God, not the people who actually fucking helped. All right, sorry. I don't know why. Like it was earlier today. It was earlier today. I watched that video and it just pissed me off. Whenever she's like, "Oh, I just can't thank God enough." I'm like, "Fuck you. Thank the people who saved you, not God." Okay, sorry. Moving on.
That is a very rare phenomenon, and everybody knew that. And so the mourners couldn't help but suspect that maybe Wong was not this incredible person that everybody loved. Maybe he had deep, dark secrets, and the way he was killed was like God's punishment, you know, smiting him for the terrible things he was hiding. But nonetheless,
Don't look up his search history.
the mourners who had just left the funeral
Oh,
followed
God.
tradition and actually walked over to the local crematorium where Wong would be cremated. Basically, it's the absolute final goodbye, and typically the family will stay there and wait for all the people to come by and pay their final respects, and then at that point the family hands off their loved one in their casket to the manager of the crematorium, and the cremation process begins. And so all that happens, all the mourners go to the crematorium, you know, they pay their final respects, and then before long, Wong's family was brought inside the crematorium with the manager, and they were placed in this quiet room to kind of wait for this process to happen. And then the manager left them and went down the hall to the furnace room where Wong's casket was waiting for him. So the furnace room inside of this crematorium is basically like this big industrial space where in the middle is this huge, intimidating metal furnace which is actually where, you know, the bodies are slid in and burned until they're just ash. And so picture like the biggest oven you've ever seen with a big metal rectangular door and these rails that slide directly into this furnace, and the casket is placed on those rails and then kind of fed into the furnace.
Someone's gonna fall in there and die.
Then, of course, ignite the furnace,
Get burned
and
alive.
then the cremation begins. And so the manager, who had done this many, many times, walked up to Wong's casket, which was already placed on the rails. Workers had already set it up for this process before he came in. And so the manager walks up to the casket, he opens it up, he sees Wong's body, and he confirms that Wong is just wearing a robe with a belt, and he did not have any jewelry or metal on him or anything like that, which was not allowed during the cremation process. And so feeling confident that this was all good, he shut the casket and then slid the casket into the furnace. He shut the door, the big metal door, locked it, and then started the furnace. And as soon as he hit it, the manager heard the familiar sound of gas hissing as the gas kind of filled up the inside of the space, and then the familiar whooshing sound of the flames igniting. But as the manager kind of stepped away from the front of this furnace and was kind of making his way back towards the door,
He heard a scream.
he noticed there was another sound coming from inside
It's a
of this
scream!
furnace. It was a hissing sound, but different than the gas sound. This was something else. And then before long, the hissing got louder and louder and louder. And then finally, there was this massive explosion inside of this furnace. And so
Did he drink gasoline? Is that what's going on? Did bro drink a bunch of gasoline and that's why he blew up when he got struck by lightning? He farted? But that's potentially.
smoke is pouring out of the sides. It was unbelievable that the furnace itself even held its shape. I mean, something massive had detonated inside of this thing. And in fact, even though that door that seals the furnace shut, even though it had not been blown off, the force of whatever detonated inside of there was so strong that the manager actually was knocked backwards from the blast. And so in a panic, he got up and there's smoke filling the room and there's flames kind of dancing out of the edges of this metal door in front of the furnace. And he hits the emergency stop and the flames cut, but it's still all smoky and it's totally chaotic and workers are rushing into the room to figure out what's going on. And the manager had no idea. This was something he had never, ever seen before. Just minutes later, firefighters arrived and basically extinguished the remaining flames that were kind of residually burning inside of the furnace and slightly outside of the furnace. Remember, this was a significant explosion, so there are cracks and breaks all over the furnace where some flames were still lit. But finally, the firefighters did extinguish all the flames, and then after it was safe to be in there, an investigation was launched as to what the heck happened in there. And so police officers went into this room and began sifting through all the debris in this room, both inside of the furnace itself.
But it's not really spontaneous if it was caused by a gas explosion.
Also, outside where it cracked and things had shot off in different directions. And for a while, they found nothing. I mean, all they found were basically pieces of Wong, ash and some bone and some tissue from him. But there was nothing else that was unusual. But at some point, one of the officers did find something that was unusual. He found a piece of metal that was inside of the furnace that clearly should not have been there. Because remember, it's not allowed to have metal or jewelry or anything on the deceased when they're brought into the furnace. And considering what happened, they're...
Wait, did he eat a bomb pie? Like in SpongeBob? The bombs that look like pies?
Like, okay, does this have something to do with the explosion? And so the officers kind of huddled around this metal and they began kind of cleaning it off to see if there was anything written on it. It's not a very big piece of metal. And eventually they had cleaned it off enough that they realized there was something written on it, and it absolutely explained what had happened here. So to understand what happened, you need to have an understanding of how the Chinese government responds to severe storms like the one that was going on the day that Wong was struck by lightning. So remember, Wong's village had all these tobacco fields all over the place, which was not only how the villagers made their living, but also...
Bro just ate an entire stick of dynamite. Oh my gosh, Ballin, stop edging? Bro, you know that Ballin's an edgelord, like for real. Like, dude, I wish he would be edging me because he's so good at it. You know what I'm saying?
China as a whole, they need these crops to be bountiful. And these huge storms that produce those golf ball sized pieces of hail, those can severely damage tobacco crops. And the Chinese government doesn't want that to happen. And so the Chinese government has set up these things called weather bureaus, which are these government agencies all across the country whose job is to try to weaken these storms. And the way they do that is very interesting. They use a chemical called silver
Real
iode that they
photo
put
of the
into the
devil's
actual storm clouds. And what silver iode does is it attracts ice particles and water. And so with this chemical up in the clouds, it kind of breaks up the hail a little bit and either makes them really small. And sometimes this chemical.
Yo, we've been able to control the weather for this long? What the fuck? We've been able to control the weather for years. Let's be real, chat. Let's be real. We probably, if we really tried, we probably could control the weather, right? If we really, like, put our funds into it. You know, if we put the same amount of money that we put into, like, war and shit into just controlling the weather, oh, yeah. Like, oh, yeah.
Can actually completely destroy the hail and convert it from hail to just plain old rain, which is great. So how do these weather bureaus and the silver iode have anything to do with what happened to Wong? Well, unfortunately for Wong, the way these weather bureaus in China actually get this silver iode up into the clouds is they basically take a rocket launcher and fire a literal.
Bro strapped a rocket to the back of a Dodge Ram. Like, what is this shit? What am I looking at? Yeah, we're gonna take the goddamn iodine rocket, shoot it out in the sky. Let's go. Let's go, boys. Let's go. Like, what the fuck? It's 4th of July.
Rocket.
This does look extremely American right here. It's the goddamn F-150.
The brand new Ford F-150.
An explosive device that contains this silver iode inside of it, and the rockets get fired up into the sky, into the clouds where they detonate, and then the silver iode is kind of sprinkled all throughout the clouds. And unfortunately, on the day Wong was killed, one of those rockets were fired into the sky, and this rocket, it goes up, 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 it goes into the cloud, but it doesn't detonate. It turns around and falls straight down, and it just so happens to go straight through that roof into Wong's head, blowing off a portion of his head.
So it wasn't lightning.
And then the rocket itself.
I was right. Oh, you guys look stupid now. You look stupid now, don't you? I told you lightning doesn't blow your head off. Oh, get fucked.
Self got embedded in his torso and did not detonate. And then when he was wheeled off to the crematorium and slid into the furnace, and that manager turned on the furnace, that hissing sound he began hearing right before the explosion.
Fact, thunderclouds can weigh up to 2 million tons.
That's cool. Also, how the fuck did they not know that there was a explosive bomb inside of his head? Like, do they not do they not check him? Right? Did they not do an autopsy or anything? They just like, no, he's good.
Was the sound of that rocket inside of Wong's torso heating up and then finally detonating. When the police officers found that little piece of metal, what they had found
why
was
would they
actually
check for it? It's called an autopsy for a reason. I feel like there's a big difference between lightning and a bomb.
Piece of the rocket itself, and when they cleared it off, they saw there was a serial number for that particular Weather Bureau rocket, and so that was how they were able to solve this mystery. 3 years after Wong's death, the Chinese government came out and said, yep, this is our fault, we did this, and so they compensated Wong's family 80,000 yuan, which is equal to about 12,000 US dollars. And while that's a pretty underwhelming settlement to be paying for somebody's life, what is significant that came out of this case is following Wong's death, the Chinese government altered their rockets that they fired into these clouds, and they added this feature where if for some reason the rocket goes into the cloud and doesn't detonate, it will automatically deploy a parachute and will safely fall to the ground and not detonate.
It's a little bit of a... It's kind of dumb you didn't do that in the first place. You guys ever see? Have you guys never seen the parachute toys? Huh? You know the parachute toys where you shoot them up in the air and they fall down? Like, come on. Like, they're stupid.
All right, I have some bad news for you. Seagull lung is missing. You see, it all started about 4 years ago when I began feuding with the like button. You know, doing silly. And that is, I created a rogue comrade. Right now, you can go to shopmrballin.com and check
what? Anyone? No, does anyone know what's going on? Lungy?
Check out the entire Lungy merch line that's only available for a limited time. We have a new graphic tee and tank. It's pretty good, but you gotta add.com.
Number one? I thought, what was this then?
On January 30th, 1989, two young men were working the afternoon lunch shift at a Domino's pizza restaurant in Chamblee, Georgia. Their names
look
were
at that
Darryl Wilson
classic
and Sean
domino
Burnson.
design, dude.
And most weeks, this shift that they worked together was really
Look at that.
boring because virtually nobody came into the restaurant. But on this day, at around 11 a.m., as Darryl and Sean are kind of twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the shift to end, a man who was obviously disgruntled and very agitated stormed in the door carrying a gun, a .357 Magnum gun, so a really powerful handgun, and he aimed it straight at them. Darryl and Sean were so shocked by this that at first they didn't do anything. But then it kind of dawned on them that, oh my goodness, this guy's coming in here to rob the place. And so Darryl and Sean suddenly put their hands up and they begin saying, you know, okay, take whatever you want, take whatever you want. And the man suddenly began shouting something at them like he wanted something. And it took Darryl and Sean a second to kind of understand what he was asking for. But when they started to process the things he was saying, they kind of understood that this did not seem like a robbery. The guy was demanding that they call Tom S. Monahan so he, this guy, the guy with the gun, can talk to Tom. Now, Darryl and Sean may have known this, but probably not, because they likely didn't care. But Tom S. Monahan, at the time, was the owner of Domino's. Not like this.
That's like going into Chuck E. Cheese and pulling up a gun. I want to talk to Chucky. Let me talk to Chucky now. Get him on the phone. Like, what kind of logic is that? Like, what the fuck? Give me the rat. Give him. I'm taking him down.
This particular restaurant in Chamblee, Georgia,
I want to talk to the Colonel.
National chain. He was the actual owner of the company. And so this guy is coming in being like, you know, let me talk to the owner of Domino's. And so at some point, Darryl and Sean understood who Tom S. Monahan was. Perhaps the guy with the gun explained it, or maybe one of them did know who Tom S. Monahan was. But either way, Darryl and Sean suddenly realized, oh my goodness, this guy wants to talk to the owner. But they have no way of getting in touch with the owner of Domino's. They're just pizza cooks. They're not like connected to the C-suite. But when Darryl and Sean told the guy like, hey, we don't know how to get in touch with the literal owner of this major franchise, well, the guy didn't like that. And he got really frantic and began yelling and screaming like, you gotta do it. You gotta get Tom on the phone. And so Darryl and Sean are like, okay. And they grab the phone and they try to call their own boss because they don't know who else to call. And as they're calling their own boss, this guy fires 2 shots into the ceiling.
Jesus.
So this is like a really high intensity situation.
Is this all going to be because bro got the wrong order? Is that what this is going to be about? I asked for a pepperoni, you gave me sausage!
It's escalating really quickly. But Darryl, who actually was the one on the phone, he did his best to stay calm, and when his boss got on the other line, he tried his best to explain the situation as quickly as he could, because he could tell, you know, this guy with the gun is very close to potentially shooting them. And the boss of Darryl and Sean did understand, okay, clearly there is a crisis happening at this branch. And when Darryl said, you gotta find a way to get Tom S. Monahan on the phone, like right now, well, his boss was like, I got it. And a few minutes later, Darryl's boss, who's still on the phone with him, was like, okay, I'm gonna patch you through. And then a second later,
he's got connections.
Tom S. Monahan hops in the phone and he's like, what's going on? And at this point, Darryl just handed the phone over to the guy with the gun and said, here you go, Tom's on the phone. And the man with the gun grabbed the phone, put it to his ear, and then began rattling off these totally bizarre demands. He wanted a white limousine to show up to the restaurant to be his getaway car. He wanted $10,000 in cash, and he wanted a copy of a science fiction novel about the Freemasons called The Widow's Son. And so,
call 911? I don't really think that's a good idea in this situation.
Darryl and Sean, who are behind the counter witnessing this, they're hearing these demands.
He's just gonna start blasting.
It's clicking for them that clearly this guy is not mentally well. This is a guy who's totally unhinged, and who knows what's gonna happen. After a few minutes on the phone, the gunman hung up and then told Darryl and Sean very calmly that now the 3 of them were just gonna sit in this restaurant and wait for his demands to be met. And for the next 5
hold up, does his demands actually get met? Dude, I hope so. Holy shit.
1.5 hours, that's what they did. Darryl, Sean, and the gunman, who just kept the gun aimed at Darryl and Sean, they just sat inside of this restaurant. And at the same time, you know, by this point, the police have been called, and they're completely surrounding this restaurant. And when the gunman came into the store, because this was a very slow day, there weren't any other customers or staff inside, so it really was just Darryl, Sean, and the gunman. And so it's a total standoff. But interestingly, for Sean and Darryl, who were right there with this gunman, they started to sense that this guy was not here to hurt them. He was really after Tom S. Monahan, and over those 5.5 hours they were just sitting there with him with his gun aimed right at them, he periodically began telling them, what his gripes were with Tom S. Monahan. The gunman told Daryl and Sean that Tom was specifically targeting him, the gunman, and also Tom was secretly communicating with the gunman when the gunman didn't want to talk to him, almost like telekinesis or something. And also
the CEO of Domino's is just attacking a random Domino's customer.
So the gunman told them that Thomas Monahan periodically will walk around his property at night, kind of creeping around, scaring the gunman. And Daryl and Sean, they're hearing these things and not believing any of it, but they were very empathetic and said, "Oh,
you know what? I'm hoping this is real, dude. I'm hoping that Thomas Monahan actually did this shit. I really hope he actually has telepathy and all of this is real, and the dude with his gun is actually being for real."
Yeah, I can understand why that would be an issue. I can understand why you'd come in here and demand to speak to Tom S. Monahan. Yep, totally get it. And that was just kind of how the day was going. And then around 4:30 p.m., so they've been in there a long time by this point, the gunman told Daryl and Sean that he was really hungry, so they better go make him some pizzas. So Daryl and Sean just got up, they went in the back, they made 2 large everything pizzas, and after they were made, they put them in boxes and slid them across the counter to the gunman. And at this moment, Daryl and Sean knew the gunman, in order to eat, would have to put his weapon down to open up the box and get the pizza. And so the second they handed it over, without even communicating with each other, they kind of waited for the gunman to put the gun down. And he did. He put the gun down. He opened the pizza up. He grabbed a slice. And at that moment, Daryl and Sean began sprinting past him towards the door. And the gunman, who's seeing this happen,
just grab the gun! What are you doing? You won! You literally won! Just grab the fucking gun! What is he gonna do? It's 2 against 1! What? Bro! What are you running for? He's just gonna grab the gun and shoot you! That is disappointing, man.
He drops the pizza, he grabs the gun, and he turns, and he aims. So to really understand what's happening here, you need to understand what type of marketing Domino's, like the national franchise, was doing to advertise their product. Starting in 1985, Domino's came up with a very popular advertising campaign called The Noid. And the Noid was actually a character. It was like this weird claymation character with big sneakers and bunny ears.
Noid!
He was like this goofy thing that was the equivalent of McDonald's.
Oh, does he think the Noid is the CEO? Does he think the Noid is following him?
Hamburglar, but this was for pizza. And what Domino's did with the Noid is they would run these ads on TV where the Noid was like this menace who was always out to disrupt pizza deliveries. Not necessarily Domino's pizza deliveries, but generally pizza deliveries. It's like the Noid's gonna destroy them, either by, freezing the pizzas on their way to the person's house, or smashing them into the ground, or causing whatever mayhem the Noid could create
really
to
creepy,
stop pizzas from getting to their customers. And so Domino's kind of catchy thing was avoid the Noid with Domino's. Meaning Domino's, the chain, was the only chain capable of avoiding all the chaos that could disrupt you getting the thing you want, your pizza. And this advertising campaign was brilliant, not only because it really worked, people really liked Domino's because it did seem like they were superior, but also they were able to kind of franchise this character itself, the Noid. It became a toy you could buy.
Jesus fucking Christ, that is horrific. Oh my God,
also,
that is nightmare.
They were able to kind of franchise this character itself, the Noid. It became
that is horrible. Mid pizza, honestly, Domino's is probably one of the best out of the chain pizza restaurants.
A toy you could buy.
Just
and there was talk about doing a TV show and maybe a movie around this Noid character. And Michael Jackson, like the king of pop, he put the Noid in one of his music videos. I mean, this was a really, really successful advertising campaign. But for as successful as this campaign was,
Domino's sucks so bad, Cope.
It did unfortunately lead to what happened inside of this Domino's restaurant in Chamblee, Georgia. So on the day, this gunman came charging in and held up the place, aiming the gun at Sean and Daryl. It would turn out the gunman's name was Kenneth Lamar Noid. And Kenneth Lamar Noid was not going into the store to get money or to steal food or to hurt, Daryl or Sean. He was there to get his revenge on Tom S. Monahan, who he looked at as the person responsible for coming up with this Noid campaign. because Kenneth Lamar Noyd was very mentally ill, and he believed
Kendrick
the
Lamar?
Avoid the Noyd campaign was not a marketing campaign, but rather Tom S. Monahan specifically targeting Kenneth Lamar Noyd, basically making him out to be this big villain. But Kenneth's plan for how to deal with this totally backfired, because in a totally ironic twist, by holding up this Domino's franchise and creating this huge standoff, he literally became like the Noid, because no pizza deliveries could be had that entire day out of that franchise. And so Kenneth Lamar Noyd, in an effort to stop Tom S. Monahan
He
from running
became
this
the
Noid
Noid.
campaign, because I'm no villain, I don't go
He
after
is the
pizzas, I
Noid.
don't try to stop people from getting their pizzas. In an effort to do that, that is exactly what he did. He literally became the human version of the Noid. And so after Daryl and Sean made a run for it towards the door, Kenneth did grab his gun and he did aim it at the two men, and he even fired it a couple of times, but he missed, and Daryl and Sean were totally unhurt. In fact, nobody got hurt. All that happened is Kenneth Lamar Noyd looked like the Noid, and he got arrested. However, instead of going to jail, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital. As for the actual advertising campaign itself, which was very successful, Avoid the Noid, well, it would not survive this total PR nightmare, and Tom S. Monahan canceled it immediately after Kenneth Lamar Noyd was taken off.
The Noid noided the Noid. That's crazy, dude.
So in a weird way, Kenneth actually did sort of get his revenge.
Avoid the Noid. Domino's Pizza delivers. Call now.
Hey,
That's why the Noid is gone? I guess so. I didn't even know that. The Noid is back though? Is it?
Now it's time to walk away. I hope you enjoyed your stay. Did you laugh or cry or maybe subscribed? I'll thank you either way. You know I will miss you. I hope you return. Tell your friend or your mother to get me more views, please.